Good evening. I'd like to call to order the June 13th, 2023 regular board meeting. If all would like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll have a brief moment of silent meditation. Move on to the roll call.
Mr. Bradley,
Here.
Mr. Burkhardt,
Here.
Mr. Hartman,
Present.
Dr. Lebo,
Here.
Mrs. Maris,
Here.
Ms. Morgan,
Here.
Dr. Rhodes,
Present via phone.
Mr. Sanker, and Mr. Rupp.
Here. Item 1.05, endorsement of agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda, Mr. Lomo?
There are no changes or additions, and the agenda will otherwise stand as written.
And item 1.06, reading of minutes of the regular board meeting of May 9th, 2023. Do any board members have any corrections or additions or deletions to the May board minutes? Seeing none, Mr. Longwell, will be accepted as printed. Move on to item 2, hearing of visitors. There will be 2 opportunities for public comment this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents of the school district. At this time, we have reached the first opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments related to items that are listed on the evening's agenda for a vote. A second opportunity for public comment will occur at the end of the meeting. The second opportunity for public comment is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable decorum. If you'd like to address the board, please come up to the podium and share your district name and address. This is for items that are being voted on tonight's meeting, on tonight's agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, reports and presentations. Item 3.01, Superintendent of Schools report, Dr. Leidy.
Good evening. I have 3 items for the board tonight. Typically, at this meeting, at the end of a season, we try to get our athletic teams that have made it to state level competition to come in front of the board. Unfortunately, this evening we had a lot of conflicts. The good news is we had a lot of potential participants. Our baseball team, softball team, and members of the track and field team all made it to state level competition, which was very exciting for the school district, and I think representative of some of the great things that are happening with our students in that area. Softball has their banquet tonight. Baseball has Legion baseball game, and our track stars were unavailable. But I just wanted to mention their successes to the board. I also, my second item for the board is a requirement that we have now through our ESSER funding, and every 6 months the requirement is that I am to publicly inform the board of where we are with health and safety, and I'm very happy to inform the board that we're in a really good place with health and safety. The plan that we have in place is continuing, and we just, finishing the 22-23 school year felt really, really good when you think about the 19-20, 20-21, and 21-22 school years. It's nice to be back to whatever that normal means for us looking forward. So from a health and safety perspective, we're where we need to be. The final item tonight, Mr. Bitts is going to give you a data update. As the board knows, we've been providing information about 3 times a year to the board and to the public about where things stand as we continue to try to build more of a local accountability model and make sure that we're addressing the hopes and dreams of the parents in our community and the community at large. We continue to evolve what this data presentation looks like for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bitts.
Yeah, so a few data points that you've seen in the past, and then as we've done in the past, we've tried to pull together some data points that make sense for us to look at any given time period. And here at the end of the year, it makes sense for us to look at the year in review a little bit from a few different perspectives. So on this first page, so we can get some size right for us here. On this first page, we're going to take a look at our senior class profile. So first, a little bit of the data about our senior class and the number of students that graduated and so on. So this is the profile as of May 31st of this year. So at that point in time, we had 333 students that were considered in our senior class, 324 of which were in their 4th year of high school, 8 from their 5th year, and 1 that was in their 6th year of high school. It's important to point out that as of May 31st, because obviously there were some students that along the way may have made the decision to drop out from the class, and those wouldn't be reflected in these numbers. But as of May 31st, we had 333, and we're proud to say that of those 333, 315 of them graduated. They walked the stage there on June 2nd. And another 13 of those 18 that weren't able to do have the potential to graduate this summer, provided that they finish up some requirements through summer school. So there are still 5 that would have requirements beyond that which could be completed during summer school. And our counselors are working with them to try and get them on track with those needs. The next screen, if you don't mind, maybe zooming out a little bit, I'd like to catch the last couple rows there too. There we go, that's perfect. So each year, one of the data points that we have to submit to the state is post-secondary intentions for each of our seniors. And this is self-reported by the seniors to our counselors. And then again, as I said, we submit this to the state based on particular categories. So for us, of the students above in our senior class, we had 218 that have indicated that their intention is to go to a post-secondary institution. And you can see the breakdown there between different types of programs, whether they be in-state, out-of-state, public, private, and obviously some other programs as well. But 218 of that senior class going on to post-secondary, to a post-secondary institution. 8 students moving on to the military, 32 to service work, 21 blue collar, 8 white collar, 1 farming. And then these last 2 categories, we have 21 students that indicated that they were as of yet undecided about what they were doing. And then there were 6 students due to being in alternative placements and some other situations that we just hadn't been able to get a data point on. So that's not to suggest that they're undecided or in one of the other categories, but 6 students that we were unable to get data from. I would say that the story for us behind this particular data point is that our goal is to have 100% of our students being able to fall in one of those categories other than undecided. Our goal is certainly through the career education and work standards and through the activities that we do throughout their schooling to be able to put our students in a position of being able to finish at MASH with a plan for the future. And obviously we had 21 students that were as of yet undecided. So that's definitely our goal, and we'll continue to work towards that with each class that we have. Yeah.
What is the service work category? What's that first?
Some examples that would fall into that, Dr. Lady.
So the way the survey works is oftentimes some of the blue collar, white collar work and the service work is separated out because of the nature of what they'll be doing. More like hospitality types of jobs and jobs where they're providing a direct service from a human perspective as opposed to a manufacturing job or a farming of some kind.
So they might not fit cleanly in the blue or white collar.
Correct.
One other question. I know some students that are taking gap years. Would that be reflected as undecided, or again, I guess that's up to the student?
It's up to the student. I would guess that many of those would fall into undecideds, but perhaps if that gap year is with an intention to go to an institution the next year, perhaps they would have reported themselves. The other one I'll point out where that becomes a little gray is the military. There are certainly some other students that are going to post-secondary institutions that may be involved in ROTC programs and things like that, that may have reported themselves as post-secondary institution as opposed to the military. So I would suggest that that number 8 is probably a little low on what ultimately we will have as students representing us in the armed forces.
Did we have any that were appointed to any of the academies, the military academies?
That's a good question. Not
No,
sure.
but we did get I know we have at least one full ride scholarship through an ROTC, I think attending James Madison.
So that's our senior class. Another group that we wanted to be able to share that we have talked extensively about in different ways over the last several years is our Mechanicsburg Keola program. So I'll take you back to a historical look here at the program. We know that Keola ultimately, or initially, was a program that we were looking to have serve our students as an alternative to commercial cyber. And it was something that we had a very small number of students involved in at the secondary level. And obviously through COVID, we had that expand tremendously. And then the numbers retract again. But during that time, we've also been able to begin to use Keola for some other things as we've gotten more familiar with the program. And frankly, as a benefit from some of the things we did throughout the pandemic, we were able to add resources and add capacity there that allows us to do some other things with Keola beyond just full-time cyber, again, in the place of a commercial cyber program for students. So as you look at those 3 other bullets there under our Keola profile, you can really say that beyond just full-time cyber, we have students that are doing these other things using Keola and earning credit towards their graduation. The first one, or the second bullet there, being a blended hybrid approach. We have students that may be in an alternative program, that may be in some classes within the high school building, but also have some classes within Keola. So they have a little bit of a blended and hybrid experience. That's a pretty small number right now and pretty specific circumstances where we're doing that, but it does allow us some flexibility with students that may be having some different challenges to be able to put that on the table as an option for students. And we'll see a few examples of where that was the case here in this particular year. Summer school and credit recovery, again, the flexibility of Keola provides us the opportunity not only to continue using it for summer school, which we did this past year, but also this upcoming summer, but also even during the school year, looking at some ways that we could have some students recover a small number of credits to be able to, again, stay on track for graduation or stay closer on track for graduation. Obviously, during the school year, we have to be careful with that because if the student already has a full slate of classes and has struggled with a particular course, we don't want to continue to overburden them with extra courses as well. But this is an option based on the flexibility of it to be able to help students recover some credits along the way as necessary. And then finally, as you know, as we talked about when the high school course selection guide for this year came out, we've expanded our online elective opportunities. The last several years, we've offered 2 different courses at the high school as elective opportunities, and some students have taken advantage of that. But we expanded that to about a dozen courses that students could choose from this year. And at least in the initial sign-up phase, we had almost 100 students that demonstrated interest in one of those 12 electives. Ultimately, as we work through conflicts and all those kinds of things, that number 100 will likely change. But ultimately, definitely a growing interest to be able to enroll in some electives that, quite frankly, because of certifications or just the nature of the course, we wouldn't otherwise be able to offer. Something like a forensic science class or some of the other specialty classes in some of our smaller departments we can offer through Keola. So a number of ways that we're now able to use this. and use it effectively to provide opportunities for students. As we scroll down here, you can see this reflects the full-time students that are enrolled in Keola. And I'll give you a minute just to read through those bullets, and obviously you can take a look at the numbers. They're in bands in the first two categories because we have still a small number of students in the K through 5 and 6 through 8 bands, but then it certainly grows as we go to high school. But just take a read through those bullets of some of the situations that those numbers represent. The story that this reflects for me is that, again, this has moved beyond the situation where we're just saving students from commercial cyber. This is a situation where a number of these students in the past very well may have dropped out altogether because of the circumstances that they were facing. And we now have a program here in our district that is staffed by district personnel from a leadership standpoint to be able to support these students. We have an amazing coordinator of this program, Kristen Gross, who's been working for us now from during the pandemic on, who's able to keep in close contact with these students and their families, and also be a go-between between that student and family and our high school or middle school or elementary as appropriate. But she's able to bridge that gap between what may be this cyber world that could seem isolating for some students, but still keep them connected to counselor support, to administrative support within the high school, and truly make sure that these students remain wildcats. And the success stories, if you scroll down just a little more there, Mr. Begum, all the seniors, all 20 students that were scheduled to graduate in Keola did graduate. And 6 of those 20 definitely had some of these concerns, whether they be dropout concerns, had to recover credits through Keola, as I said, in some sort of a blended or hybrid placement, and needed some additional supports. And one student in their 6th year was able to graduate through the support of Keola. So some real success stories of being able to use this program, which we continue to believe is a program that can outpace that which is offered in many ways from the commercial cyber programs and be a support to our students.
Vince, the 30 students they're labeled into mental health. Are they getting the other mental health things that are available through the school, even though they're not in the building? I mean, are those needs being addressed, or are they there because it's the best placement for them, or is it more of a family decision?
Yes, yes, and yes. We certainly, by remaining in Keola, we're able to continue to provide that counselor support, provide social work support, provide special education support as necessary. In many of these cases, I speak anecdotally of situations where a student just has severe anxiety issues that they just can't come into the building, that it's just not something that's comfortable for them. And they are able, however, to hop on Zooms with Kristen Gross, the coordinator I spoke of, or hop on a Zoom with the counselor to be able to have conversations. And in some cases, be able to come in for some in-person office hours. We now have her able to meet with students also at the high school, where students will just come in one-on-one, be able to come straight to the office where they're able to meet with her, be able to get some assistance, and then be able to go home again. So there's all sorts of ways that those supports still happen, but they definitely do still happen.
So kids that you had, I think there were 6 that were labeled COVID.
Yes.
Are those kids that started taking cola during COVID and they seem to like it so much they continue to stay with it?
I couldn't tell you. Not sure of the specifics of when they entered or not, but we certainly do have some, when you look K through 12, that did enter Keola and haven't come back out. But we certainly, of course, have many that did return. So I couldn't speak to those 6 specifically, but we have some in
I was
those.
just wondering if those started to get going. have stayed.
Right. Have some traditional markers that we've looked at here. This shows our discipline incidents. Again, as a reminder about this data, the number of incidents, obviously an incident could involve more than one student, and obviously we could have students involved in more than one incident. So that's why they're reported as separate numbers. You can see this year, over the course of the year, in comparison to last year, numbers are a little bit up, and obviously moved throughout the year, with the fourth marking period being the low number of incidents this year. I think the story here is one that we've felt for the last several years, and is one of the main reasons why, when we did complete the comprehensive plan, in goal number 2, we're looking at systems of support related to behavior. So in April, we had a professional development where the behavior support committee that our district level student services staff and a number of teachers and administrators had worked on, that now we were able to roll out some guiding principles around behavior to our staff as a whole, K through 12. And next year, we'll be taking that to the building level. So each building will be developing a positive behavior support team, which is a research-based strategy that's out there that many different school districts use. And we'll be excited to be able to put those into place in our buildings and hopefully start to make a better impact on numbers that aren't all that different than pre-COVID, frankly, when you look at the totals and look at our rising enrollment, but it's still something that we want to continue to improve. Some passing rates, we'll start just with the middle school one. Again, since we're at the end of the year, just a cumulative rate. These, as you can see from the legend up there, in 6th and 8th grade, those are the percentage of students who passed 4 of their 5 core classes. And in 7th grade, simply because of the number of core classes that they have, it's the rate of students who passed 5 of their 6 core classes. So obviously, anyone that didn't fall into those categories, we're hoping to be able to bring up to speed through summer school, which we'll be offering again at both the middle school and the high school. I mentioned high school is a completely online program with our teaching staff doing the instruction through Kaola. At the middle school, that's still an in-person program that we have that involves not just academics, but also some of those, meeting some of those social emotional needs that our students often have who are in this situation as well. And the MASH passing rate, you can see there for semester 1 and then semester 2. Again, students will have the opportunity to be able to earn credit back through summer school. And all of our summer school programs, I should have said this as I was kind of reviewing them, all of them are being supported by our ESSER funding as well, once again this year. So that's something that we were able to do last year and continue this year. And we'll still be able to perhaps next summer as the ESSER funding continues through next summer, but we'll see how much we have left at that point. Mr. Lovell? All right, these numbers we are used to looking at. We made the columns just a little too wide. There we go. So these are our screeners, and again, to set the stage for you, we give screeners for 2 reasons. Those 2 reasons, number 1, are to wave the yellow flag on individual students. So it's called a universal screener. So every student in the particular grade levels noted there takes this screener. And it's just a very short assessment to identify whether a student has some additional needs. It won't say what those needs are because it's just a screener, but it's saying, something's going on here, you better dig in. Similar to when you go to the doctor, you go in and of course the nurse comes in first and does a number of different screeners to be able to tell if there's anything that's waving the yellow flag on your health. That's the same way here. So trying to do a temperature check for students. The other reason we do screeners is because it's a temperature check for what we call our Tier 1 program. So the curriculum that's guaranteed and viable for every one of our students that walks through our doors. And from a general standpoint, that temperature check is, we would like to see 80% or more of our students being at low risk or being on track for doing well in the program. Research shows us that we should expect about 20% of our students needing something in addition to our typical program that we would offer all of our students. So that 80% being in low risk, or in the case of some of these low risk and exceeding expectations, is the magic number that we're hunting for. So in the first one, early reading composite, that's our kindergartners and first graders that take some screeners on their early reading skills. This might include letter naming, letter sounds, and a number of very early reading skills. So from left to right, you can see where we were at the beginning of the year to the center. So 64%, 71%, 67%. And then from the center on, you can see where our end of year was the last several years. So at the end of 2021, we were at 54%. At the end of last year, kindergarten and first grade was 64%, and now you can see we're at 67%. So obviously those are different cohorts of students each time along those 3 years, but some slightly discouraging from left to right in terms of the drop from 71% to 67% at the end of the year, but encouraging ultimately that at the end of the year we've continued to see some rebounding from the COVID slide that we saw.
Thank you. But you want that 67 to be 80%, did you say?
Please, yes. That's the goal. And along with that 80%, seeing the high risk number hopefully continuing to decrease. Again, we would expect that probably about 8 to 10% would fall in that high risk range. But obviously we're 3 to 5 rather in the high risk range, but we're obviously over that.
I mean, I kind of understand the last 2 years with COVID and stuff, but do we have any explanation as to maybe why we're short on the 80%?
Well, I would say even pre-COVID, we weren't hitting 80%, so I think I'll lead with that. And ultimately, there is more work to be done with our Tier 1 curriculum. You know, the fact that it's a Tier 1 temperature check is about right, because we do have more work to do, not just in kindergarten and first grade, but second through 7th. And you'll see the same thing in math as well. We know that through COVID and through the curriculum work we're doing right now, we expect to see that benefit us ultimately. We know there's ways that we can continue to improve our curriculum and working on that. So it doesn't come as a surprise, but obviously anytime we don't hit that 80%, it's disappointing as well. So looking at A reading, there again, you want to look at the top 2 rows to see the cumulative number for the 80% check, if you will. So again, you can see that we were actually growing by a little bit here over the course of the year, but then over the last couple of years, again, we ended the year 5% ahead from where we were last year.
Spitz, if I could just jump in, maybe to answer the question a little bit differently, and it's what he said, but I'm going to say it a little bit differently. When you're not at 80%, we're looking at what are we doing across the board with all students. Once we hit 80%, we're saying, what are we doing with that other 20% of students, if that makes sense. So the fact, to your point, what are we doing because we're not at 80%? We're looking at the Tier 1 curriculum and asking questions about what can we do differently with all kids versus what are we doing with individual students that aren't.
Who's setting the 80%? Like us, or is that a nationwide?
I'm sorry.
Who's setting the 80%?
That's the goal of our program. So when we say Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, our goal is to meet 80% of our kids with a Tier 1 program. And in Tier 2, 10 to 15%, and Tier 3, 5 to 10%. That way, the resource allocation that we have around staff and time, et cetera, is allocated in that manner.
And that 80% is accepted by researchers as being the goal for Tier 1. So just another figure here for, this is reflecting the growth on both early reading and A reading. You can see both on the same chart here. Again, comparing it to previous years, this is the percentage of students who made typical or aggressive growth over the course of the year. You can think of this as typical growth is basically saying in a roundabout way that they grew a year for a year. They were in school for a year and they grew for a year. Aggressive growth would indicate that they grew more than a year. So a student that maybe was high risk growing more than a year for a year is a great thing, because that's the only way they're going to catch up ultimately to being low risk and on grade level. Obviously, not falling in that group doesn't mean that they didn't grow at all. It just didn't mean that they grew completely that year for a year. So we continue to look at this to be able to identify what our goal is with this. It feels like it should be 100%, but it also doesn't necessarily make sense that 100% of our students are going to make that particular goal either. So we continue to monitor, and what's most important is that our teachers at the individual student level are monitoring all of this data for individual students to be able to say, okay, well, this student performed well from an achievement standpoint, but didn't grow enough, and we need to be able to help them to grow more. Or vice versa, this student isn't achieving very well, but look how much they grew and how much they're really catching up to their peers. So all that individual conversation happens at the building level. Then we look at the same for our math, and these are early math screenings. In the top, again, looking just strictly at low risk. You can see how that has changed throughout this year, and then end of year in comparison to previous years. And then the bottom one is our 2nd through 5th grade this time, again, through the year and in comparison to past years. We've spent a lot of time this year. When I talked about the curriculum work that we've been doing this year at the elementary level has really been focused on math, at being able to what we've called stabilize our math curriculum, go back to what we were doing pre-COVID and some of the lessons learned during COVID to be able to determine what the best program is for our students to be able to meet their needs. So we've really, again, been focused on, at the elementary level, on the math curriculum. So seeing some early returns from that is encouraging, and ultimately, as we implement that curriculum more next year, we hope to be able to see more. And I think and again, the growth from beginning to end of the year, the last several years in both of those. Last data point I want to share with you comes as a little bit of a follow-up to some data that we shared with you last year. We shared with you some of the civil rights data that we reported to the federal government, actually, in that case. And one of the data points that we had shared with you was our numbers of students that were qualifying as gifted and talented. And ultimately, we were seeing how that number was not only declining, but the disproportionality that was present within that data compared to our student population overall, when you looked at not only gender, but also race and ethnicity. So one of the things coming into this year that we wanted to do was see what were some initial steps we could take to try and start casting a wider net. Something that a number of districts have traditionally done that we haven't done for quite some time is a universal screening for gifted. And we chose to do that this year. The test is called the Naglieri. It's named after the guy that created it. But we gave it as a universal screening for all 2nd graders this year. So the number of students that were screened were 306 students. And based on those screenings, we were able to identify 37 students that ultimately will qualify for some additional screening. That doesn't mean that they'll all turn out gifted. That doesn't even necessarily mean that they'll all go on to a full battery of testing. But again, similar to how I was describing a screening earlier, this is simply saying, hey, this student's showing some promise to potentially have the skills to be identified as gifted. and then some additional screening and testing would happen to see if they qualify. So through this, we were able to identify 37 students that previously weren't on our radar for this, and now do some additional screening with them. You can see the demographics of that group. Quite frankly, you continue to see some disproportionality within this group, but it is ultimately, to me, encouraging to know that we now have 37 more students that we otherwise wouldn't have been checking, to now be able to do some additional screening and see if they will qualify. 4 of those being students who would ultimately be dual identified as special education and gifted, which is a thing. That is something that's possible for students. 2 students that are Section 504. Unfortunately, no students through this particular screening that were identified as English learners, but we know that there are students who are English learners that are gifted, and we need to continue to find ways to be able to identify those students. And then you can see the breakdown there by race and ethnicity and also socioeconomic.
So the only thing the race ethnicity numbers, it does stand out in one sense, where you see the raw numbers, but it doesn't reflect like what is the population that we were working with.
Sure.
Were we dealing with 2 black students and 2 out of 2, so you had 100% of the black students,
Sure.
or the Asian students, you had 4 Asian students that were in the population, so you had a 50% meeting that. So that's the only thing, when I look at those numbers, they do stand out, the breakout, but what I don't quite get from that is, what is it as a representation of the population that we're dealing with, so.
So if you remember back from last year's presentation, obviously you don't have the chart in front of you or the numbers memorized certainly, but if you remember some of the demographics from our overall district population and some of the proportions there, this certainly goes along with the disproportionality that we saw at that time.
Right.
So it's safe to say that certainly the number of, specifically white students to students of color is disproportionate.
I'll just add to that typically, and I use that word carefully, typically you're looking at 2% of the population that would be identified as gifted. And so I think you bring up a really good point. It'd be interesting to run those numbers from a percentage standpoint and say, what percent are they of the population, and is 2% then of that? I gotta tell you that I think that's closer than where we are currently with who we've actually identified. But I think it's a great question. We can run those numbers and let the board know. It's a great
We've
question.
identified 37 kids out of 300, I mean, that's
Absolutely.
10%.
Right, but this is just an initial screening. This isn't the full battery of tests. This is, as Mr. Bitts said, just to say, hey, here's a student you may want to do some additional testing with.
Did you say that 2% was what our district average, or was that more of a
That's more of a
nationwide?
national average around gifted. Still, all right, Mr. Bitts, still 2%?
2.8%.
2.8%.
Ours is about 2%.
I think ultimately it was a step in the right direction, encouraging look at how can we cast a wider net and continue to identify some students.
I mean, in the past, Mr. Bitts, was primarily just recommendations of teachers or parents to even begin initially testing.
Yeah, so officially either of those groups can, either staff member or a parent can request testing. I would say on the gifted side, it leans more heavily on families requesting the testing, but not exclusively.
And they still can, despite despite these results, because again, sometimes I feel like we talk out of both sides of our mouths. We're saying, well, we shouldn't base everything on a standardized test, because we know that students can demonstrate skills beyond just a standardized test. And just to be clear with the board, that a parent request or a teacher request still could come forward despite these results.
So, I mean,
Do
a
the
student
parent-
could do poorly on one of these tests.
Correct.
Bad day, whatever.
And we may look at
The family could still come forward and say, I think the
Correct.
child should still be.
And we can look at classroom-based experiences and how they perform in the classroom.
So were the parents notified about the results of this? testing?
They will be if the students have qualified for additional testing. And then it's up to the parent to decide if they want to proceed with it or not.
Thank you.
So throw a lot of data at you there. Again, I think that the rhythm of this at 3 times a year is better than what we've done in the past, and we want to continue to show those things to you as we continue working on what does a local accountability model look like. Last thing I will share with the board, I've been asked to be part of a group of superintendents. There are 5 of us in the state that will be providing recommendations to the governor's office around assessment and accountability. And we're meeting for the first time tomorrow to begin to develop some of the recommendations that we would give them to the governor's office. It appears that the current administration is extremely interested in looking at accountability models beyond what the federal government has out there. So there's a little bit of a window there that we want to try to get through as quickly as possible.
Can you speak loudly?
No worries, no worries. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Liney. 3.02, Capital Area Intermediate Unit, Mr. Bradley.
Yes, the intermediate unit board met on May 25th. This time of year, as is normal for them, spent a lot of time with the different budgets. Just as a reminder to the board, there is a kind of a general fund budget that the contributing school districts vote on, and then there are smaller budgets that are really tied to individual programs. A lot of those budgets are dependent on grants or money from the state or federal programs that are out there. Yet they still have to be managed and they still have to be voted on by the representatives, but not bring it back to the collective board. The other part was to spend some time highlighting the different graduation opportunities that were available in the month of May. Had talked about before that some of the graduation opportunities for students of the intermediate unit are geared more towards them to be able to, some may not have been able to handle larger 300 plus students and be able to walk with a large group, and they have a small, more intimate group, but still have that opportunity to recognize their accomplishments and to, in essence, walk like they would walk with their regular graduation classes. So highlighted some of those opportunities. And then next board meeting will be on the 22nd next week.
Any questions for Mr. Bradley? Thank you for the report, Mr. Bradley. Item 3.03, Cumberland Perry Area Career and Technical Center report. Mr. Sanker had no meeting, had no report to forward. Item 3.04, PSBA legislative report. I have nothing new to report this month.
No budget yet.
No budget. If anybody has anything on the budget that I don't know about, feel free to bring it up right now. Item 3.05, Finance Facilities Committee report. The committee did not meet in May. Everything was done at the work session. And lastly, 3.06, Board President report. I'd like to announce cancellation of June 27th, 2023 Finance and Facilities Committee meeting and work session. Announce executive session held on May 23rd, 2023 at 6 p.m. for personnel and legal matters. And announce executive session held on June 13th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. to discuss personnel and student matters. Move on to item 6, new business, budget and finance. Item 6.01, Ms. Morgan.
Fine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Item 5, new business, athletics, recreation. Item 5.01, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the 2023 recreation staff and summer salaries for payroll and audit purposes.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
I'll recuse myself due to a conflict of interest.
Item 5.02, Dr. Lebo.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the winter athletic appointments for the 2023-2024 school year.
Second. Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 5.03, Dr. Lebo.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the cancellation of water polo as an athletic program.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
I abstain.
Item 6, new business, budget and finance. Item 6.01, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the treasurer's report as per the attachments, which include the following. Number 1 is the treasurer's report for May 2023. 2 is the board budget report, May 2023. 3 is the general fund invoices, paid check number 65984 through 66216 in the amount of $1,231,999.92. Number 4 is the electronic payments in the amount of $5,596,798.53. Number 5 is the general fund invoices payable check number 66217 through 66235 in the amount of $885,623.45. Number 6 is the capital reserve fund invoices paid check number 1857 through 1858 in the amount of $14,099.02. Number 7 is the Series AA of 2020 Construction Fund invoices paid check number 283 through 287 in the amount of $126,929.63. Number 8 is the Series of 2020 Construction Fund invoices paid check number 261 through 263 in the amount of $8,572.50. Number 9 is the series of 2022 construction fund invoices paid check number 101 in the amount of $845,164.85. And lastly, number 10 is the investment portfolio.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.02, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to approve the fund balance commitments for June 30, 2023, as presented in the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.03, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to adopt the 2023-2024 final general fund budget in the amount of $93,795,820 with a real estate tax rate of 15.7022 mils, which includes a 3.25% increase in real estate taxes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.04, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to adopt the homestead farmstead exclusion resolution, establishing the homestead and farmstead exclusion amount for 2023-2024.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.05, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to approve insurance renewals for 2023-2024, which includes student accident insurance as presented in the attached, and to approve the property liability package as provided by Utica and AIG Insurance.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.06, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to appoint Stock and Leader as solicitor for 2023-2024, which includes the rates listed in the attached.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
6.07, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to appoint Penn State Health as school physician for the 2023-2024 school year.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.08, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to authorize budget transfers to balance individual expenditure accounts for 2022-2023 following the completion of the local audit.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
6.09, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to authorize board officers to approve payment of invoices for the month of July.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.010, Mr. Burkhardt.
I ask the board to approve the license agreement with Veolia as presented in the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further comments?
I have a question. The initial term of the agreement is for 10 years, which is renewable every 5 years. So does the agreement have anything to do with the painting that is supposed to last for 20 years?
Well, it's all, I think from a licensing perspective, they like to keep their options open in the event something were to happen to the water tower, but the water tower itself, their normal maintenance and plan for it is to just paint it every 20 or more years. And so that's, from a practical standpoint, really what we'd be looking at is the 20 or more years, and the painting will last that long or more.
I'd also like to thank the Wildcat Foundation for their donation to get the Wildcat on the tower. And finally, it's over.
Finally
Probably, Dr. Leidy has put more into this over the last couple of years than probably any other singular thing.
It will be a chapter in the book.
Wow.
Amazing. It took so much to actually get the water company to own up to what was their responsibility, you know, what was ours and the other developers in the area. So, but we prevailed eventually. So. Any other discussion? Mr. Longwell?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 6.11, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to approve the tax policy report as per the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 7, new business curriculum. Item 7.01, Mrs. Maris.
Make a motion for the board to approve the student services contracts as presented in the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 7.02, Mrs. Maris.
I make a motion for the board to approve the Activity Days as presented in the attachment for 2023-2024 school year.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 8, new business facilities. Item 8.01, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to award project bids for the swimming pool project as presented in the attachments.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I will record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 8.02, Mr. Bradley.
I'd ask the board to award the project bid to Detraglia Excavating and Landscaping for the sewer line repair project at Upper Allen Elementary as presented in the attachment.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 9, new business, personnel, item 9.01. Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the personnel report as presented in the attachments.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
I will abstain.
I will recuse myself as well.
Item 9.02. Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the retiree service contracts for 2023 through 2024.
Ms. Second.
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 9.03. Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the extra duty assignments for 2023 through 2024.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
9.04. Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the school police appointments for 2023 through 2024 as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 9.05. Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve the job description of Assistant Athletic Director as presented in the attachment.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10, new business, policy, item 10.01. Mr. Hartman.
I move to approve the second and final reading of revised board policy 137, home education programs as per the attachments.
A second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10.02. Mr. Hartman.
I move to approve the second and final reading of revised board policy 137.1, extracurricular participation by home education students as per the attachments.
A second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
10.03. Mr. Hartman.
I move to approve the second and final reading of revised board policy 251, student experiencing homelessness in foster care and experiencing educational instability as per the attachments.
A second.
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10.04. Mr. Hartman.
I move to approve the deletion of board policy 255, education stability for children in foster care.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10.05. Mr. Hartman.
I move to approve a non-resident tuition-free student to complete the 23-24 school year.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 10.06. Mr. Hartman.
I move to adopt the agreement and waiver of hearing before the Board of Directors between parent, student, and the board, and the terms and conditions set forth therein. Direct the superintendent to place said agreement in students' education records. Authorize the superintendent to act on behalf of the board in implementing the agreement and order the expulsions of the following students. Student G of 22-23 beginning May 16, 2023 for 1 calendar year. Student H of 22-23 beginning May 16, 2023 for 1 calendar year. Student I of 22-23 beginning May 31st, 2023 for 1 calendar year. Student J of 22-23 beginning May 31st, 2023 for 1 calendar year.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Mr. Longwell.
Unless I hear a negative response, I'll record the roll call as a unanimous vote.
Item 12, hearing of visitors. We have reached the second opportunity for public comment. This opportunity is reserved for comments on issues not listed on the agenda and not being voted upon this evening. As a reminder, public comment is limited to residents of the school district. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual and requires community members to observe a reasonable decorum. If you'd like to address the board, please come up to the podium and share your name and district address. Ms. Van.
I'll try to keep it as close to 3 minutes as I can. My name is Kay Myers. I live at 1117 White Dawn Lane, Mechanicsburg, 17055. I'm here tonight to address my concerns regarding the leadership of the MASH varsity football program. It should be noted that the concerns I will express tonight do not pertain to my son's freshman or the 22-23 JV experience. The experience we had as part of both of those teams was remarkably positive. My son was a senior in this past school year and has played football in Mechanicsburg since he was 6 years old. My concerns run deep, not just because of our recent personal experiences, but because of the concerns of families that have gone before mine and likely of those who will come after if some changes are not made. These areas of my concern are as follows. Coach Anthony Rose is an effective, passive leader, not only within the game of football, but of student athletes. This pseudo leader is easily manipulated by coaches on his staff. Less visible, but more dominant personalities who have been allowed to call the shots within the football program have caused general dysfunction, dissonance among those who were part of the program, detriment to the team's unity and performance, and have adversely affected our student athletes. Coach Rose is weak in his leadership role, and he is unwilling to right the numerous wrongs that can and do affect our student athletes. Coach Frank Rubenig, the offensive coordinator, has demonstrated an inability to make good football-related decisions for success. He is a poor role model for the players, as he has demonstrated neither the football IQ, the patience, nor the objectivity to bring out the best in the student athletes. This coach's negative demeanor, closed-minded, and biased approach is counterproductive to an overall positive athletic experience for the young student athletes. I understand that football is a very physical and emotional sport that sometimes allows poor behavior and detrimental behavior counter to the mission of the school district, but that doesn't make it right. Coach Steve Ryder is a wolf in sheep's clothing who selfishly only cares that his son looks good before the team's success. The three mentioned coaches are bullies in professional positions with specific agendas. My ask for the board to consider. I have come to this meeting tonight to advocate for the young student athletes whose identity may be enmeshed in the MASH football program. For some, football is the motivation they need to do well academically. For others, the football program may be a lifeline. For some else, it may be a pathway to higher education. It may be only the pathway for a few. It is critical to have coaches, leaders, mentors, role models who have shown that they deserve these very important positions. We in this room have the power and the authority to ensure accountability and to protect the student athletes who are negatively affected by those who are ineffective and detrimental, not just to the program, but to the student athletes' overall mental health. I ask for your consideration of the following. Consider replacing Coach Rose, Coach Rubenig, and Coach Ryder. Replacement of ineffective coaches with those who have demonstrated prior successes both on the field and off the field. And clarification of the responsibility of the athletic director when an athletic program is showing signs of hardship. I will send each member of the board a follow-up email outlining in more detail the specifics of what the actions of these men have done specifically to my son and other student athletes. And I will also CC Dr. Leidy and Mr. Reedy.
And ma'am, the best way to really do it is to send it to Mr. Longwell, who's our board secretary, the non-voting member, but he's our board secretary, and then he can get the information out to all of us.
Okay,
Saves
wonderful.
you putting it out to everybody. Just-
Absolutely.
He gets it, he'll make sure we all have it.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items that were not on the agenda for a vote tonight? Sally?
Good evening, I'm Sally Holbert, I live at 424 West Main Street. And I want to know if the board has, or the school district has a policy on transgendered athletes. That would be boys transitioning to girls wanting to play girl sports. And if there isn't one, I would suggest that you get a policy and disallow that.
Dr. Light, would you have anything you'd like to
Yeah,
add
we don't
now, or
currently
would you
have a
rather
policy,
get back to her
one way or
later?
the other on that.
So could that be added to an agenda?
Well, that's up to the board to make that decision, and it's something that we'll consider.
Okay, I'll come back and find out. Thank you.
Yes, we'll keep in touch. Any other comments on items that were not on the agenda for a vote tonight? Not listed or for a vote? Seeing none?
Yes, I am. Oh, sorry.
All right, you have a minute and a half.
Do I need to, she's
No, we
going to
know
email to me if I need it, but I won't. I'd like to find out the stormwater issue at Broad. I worked on that issue for a very long time. When my daughter was 5 years old, we did a fairly detailed study of stormwater. There's still a lot of problems. And I think the school needs to own up to their impervious, mismanaged stormwater coming off the property. I know you were out there ripping rock on the old detention basin that never drained. But I still see the orange tape out on the inlet that's surcharging. That pipe is coming off the school's property, and is there improvements to address that situation? And then also the two ponds that are poorly designed in front of Broad Street Elementary. They should drain and they're not draining.
Would you like to answer something now, or? get
Yeah,
back to it later?
I can give you a partial answer now, but if you stick around, I can give you more detail to it. But it is not complete yet. We are waiting for the road construction work and the work that will be done to the infrastructure under that road, which is currently in progress, and I can give you more detail about that.
And I probably can't wait tonight, but can I get what's happening with the ponds in
Well,
front
it's
of
all
the detention
connected.
basins?
It's all connected. So
Okay.
right now, the ponds are not draining as they should because it's not connected to the stormwater that it will get connected to under the
Is
street.
there design plans to look at? And can I get a
We'll
copy
get you
of this?
something. Yeah,
They're recorded
absolutely.
at the county courthouse,
Thank you.
and the borough should have a copy also.
Any other comments? Seeing none. Item 13, Ms. Morgan.
I'd like to ask the board to approve adjournment.
A second.
Second.
Meeting is adjourned.